You are listening to the Game Like Training podcast, where we talk about golf practice, golf learning, golf psychology, the golf swing, P.G.A. Tour, college golf, and all things golf. On this show, we're talking about some of the most common things that are going on in the golf world. We share our beliefs and our insight in the industry, which has really come from being within this industry for over a decade. We try to bring on as many top quality coaches, world-renowned academics, and pioneering professors from different domains that can really help the industry and help coaches or players play better golf, or teachers teach better. Hey, I'm your host, Arick Zeigel.
And I'm your co-host, Iain Highfield. And before we get started, I just want to say we love golf and we love helping people. That combined has driven us to create this podcast. There's so much good information out there. We believe it's our responsibility to share that information with as many people as we can. And today on the show, our good information is going to come from, and Arick, I don't know which way to put this round. Is it Jason Sutton, the golf guru, or is it the golf guru, Jason Sutton? Because I knew you as the golf guru first.
Either one's fine.
Awesome. Nice to have you on the show, Jason. Do you want to just introduce yourself, tell the listeners a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. Big fan of your work, and it's an honor to be here and spend some time with you. The short of it is I've been teaching and coaching for over 26 years, which makes me really feel old at this moment saying that. That was my 27th year of coaching, which has included the last 7 years at one of the best spots in Charlotte. And we're the best spot in Charlotte, called Carmel Country Club. It's a great high-end 36-hole facility. I've got a couple of great assistants that work for me, so we have a little academy there. Previously, I was at a top 25 golf school, so I was in the golf school space for over 11 and a half years. And then before that, getting into the golf business, I was an assistant at a couple of places in West Virginia, and then moved to Charlotte and was a head professional for a couple of years till I figured out that's exactly what I didn't want to do in the golf business. And so then I got into teaching and coaching full time when I went to work at Dana Rader Golf School, as I mentioned. So had a lot of experience and just trying to get better every day like you guys.
That's awesome. Very similar to my story.
Except one thing. How old are you, Arick?
I'm 27.
So Jason taught his first lesson when you were 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, perfect. So Jason, we spoke, we had a great conversation, I think it was on Friday evening, about the golf industry, and we chatted a little bit this morning. And on today's show, we're going to really talk about how we move from teaching in lessons to coaching. Now, can you explain what that means to you?
Yeah, I think, that's often debated in our circles in teaching and coaching and trying to, figure out what's the difference between the two. If I had to define it, I would say teaching is more, working on motor patterns, skill development, the technique side of what we do every day. And then moving more into coaching would be, transferring that skill to the golf course, for ultimately getting results out of our students, whether it's motivation, testing, games, more of the practice side, teaching them how to, get the changes to the golf course from, that awkward stage of learning a new skill. So I think there has to be a flow of that throughout even an hour lesson. I try to do that with every lesson, especially with my long-term development students. The one-off student that you may see for the first time might be more heavily weighted in that teaching at first because they need some work and they need to start building those skills. But if you can keep that student around long enough and get them to come back frequent enough, you can start moving more into that coaching phase.
Awesome. So what does that look like for you, Jason? How do you, if I came to you for a lesson and I was going to be committed, and say, yeah, let's enter into something long term. I want to win the club championship, whatever it might be. What would that process generally look like? And I know this is a generalization because everyone's different, but you know, your kind of framework, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that I've had to look back. I think it's good for all of us coaches to sort of reflect on the structure of our lessons and the structure of our programs as we take the students through the learning process. And I've been very fortunate to spend time with a lot of other coaches that are way smarter than me. And I actually did 3 different certifications in the last probably 18 months. And one of the best ones was with Tyler Farrell, which a lot of people out there know is one of the smartest in our industry. And his Golf Smart Academy training is absolutely fantastic. And he basically breaks it down into what he calls the 4 phases of awareness training. And for me, I would just call that the learning process. So he breaks it down into 4 areas, which is transcendental, receptors, cortical phase, and then complex. And if we had to go sort of deeper into sort of an example of that, you would have the first phase, the transcendental phase, would be when you introduce a new idea to your students, right? Your first diagnosis, and you say, well, for an example, let's say you got somebody, your typical club player that has an open club face and they're swinging across at 12 degrees and hitting slices. You have to have them buy into the fact that maybe we need to change the club face first, right? And then you introduce an idea of, okay, we need to maybe change the way your wrist angles are working in early transition to square the club face properly. So they have to buy into it. So it's something that they know the golf ball is going to the right. They can't argue with that, right? So that's the first phase. And then you go into the receptor phase, which is probably where we spend most of our time as coaches. And that's where we start using visual imagery, whether it's video, TrackMan, or for me, I use a lot of restrictions, whether it's moving people the way I want them to feel the change, or more importantly, I'll move them in opposite directions to where they have to actually do the change. They have to move in the direction that they need to do, and I'm going to resist. So a lot of resistance training, whether I'm using noodles or Varibands or sticks or whatever, I'm using constraints. So you're really diving into their subconscious and making them feel awkward, and they're going, all right, I can feel what you're telling me to do. Probably that first level of understanding, going, I can't do it yet, but I understand, and you guys have a mutual agreement. Then you go into the cortical phase, which is when you start seeing that change. And it might even be, for me, I like to have people do a lot of what we call deep practice, which is a lot of slow motion stuff, really, so they can feel it. A lot of stuff without a golf ball, so I can start to see that change. And then you maybe start introducing the golf ball, and they're making some swings, starting to hit some better shots. Ball's not going to the right anymore. The goal, you've got that buy-in from the student. So then you can start asking them those open-ended questions in that cortical phase, where you might say, if they do it wrong one time, you say, well, why wasn't that correct? Right. And then as good coaches, you need to learn to shut up and say, have that student own the change so they can start to have a chance to transfer that skill to the golf course. They maybe don't own it completely, but they can start to solve that problem on their own. And then you go into the 4th phase, which is complex, where you're starting to ask them to do multiple things. So you may say, oh, we've got the wrist angle movements coming down. The club face is actually squaring up nicely. We're hitting pulls, or the ball's not going to the right. Now let's introduce maybe a pressure shift or a body pivot or a path change, and let's see if you can handle that. So the movement patterns start to become a little more subconscious. And I think what I've found when I look back at lessons that maybe, I wouldn't say doesn't go so well, or more importantly, they don't transfer to the golf course. Because how many times have we heard that student say, I'm hitting it great on the range, but I can't quite get it to the golf course?
Never.
We've probably never, right? Yeah. The $1 million question. But what's happening as coaches, and this is good for coaching and players out there, is we've probably skipped from like 2 to 4, right? Or we've skipped a couple of those training phases where we get the repetitions in, we start to own it, and more importantly, we start to understand when we don't do it correctly, what do we need to change or what do we need to feel? And obviously there's drills and stuff involved in there that if it's necessary, depending on the type of student that you have. But I think keeping your learning in that order and making sure that you don't get ahead of the students' learning, I think, is the biggest thing I've learned over my career, which is, I know you guys know, is very, very important.
Yeah, and I think that's a cool way to look at it. Those kind of 4 learning phases that you just talked about, because I think as a coach, and when you look at social media or whatever, you see a lot of people who are, I mean, even if you're watching the Golf Channel, analyzing somebody's golf swing, and they say like, these are the 5 things. These are only the 5 things we need to work on, and they're trying to address all 5, issues in the golf swing at the same time. And kind of what you just talked about, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of breaking it into that first phase. It's like, okay, we're going to work on club face. If we're addressing club face first, then we're going to work on that. We kind of go through these 4 phases, and then we're going to address path. It's not necessarily trying to work on, a plethora of things at the same time. And I think that's kind of a good way to approach it. Is that kind of correct in how I'm interpreting that?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's also just keeping a pulse on your student, right? I mean, you can tell. I mean, I classify students in 2 different categories: as some are quick changers and some are slow changers, right? So some need a little bit more moving in. The slow changers might need you to move them more exaggerated into the opposite pattern, right? So they can really start to feel it, and they might move an inch. Where the fast changer, you got to be real careful, because if you give them whatever you give them, they're going to do. Right. So they're going to, they may come back and they're swinging 12 to the right the next lesson. It's a lot of times we get that in our kids. The kids are famous for overdoing stuff as their bodies are changing and growing. But I think it's just keeping a pulse on the student. And again, just monitoring them. And that's where the testing comes in, is talking about sort of going from that to into coaching. The ideal lesson would be, as we have obviously long-term students, you would have that situation where you feel like they're getting it, they're starting to hit the ball well, you're getting 75, 80% of the results that you're looking for. Then you go and you set up a test on TrackMan, or you set up a constraint or something that's going to test them as close as you could get to being on the golf course, and say, all right, let's see if it breaks down. Let's see how much you've actually consumed and how much your subconscious is absorbed and how much pattern has changed. And if then you know real quickly whether you may have to go back to 2 or 3 and redo it again.
Yeah, I think this is cool.
That stole my next question. That's what I was going to ask. What do you do when it breaks down? So Jason's 1 step ahead of me there.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm stuck now.
Where my mind goes, Ian, is our learning continuum, that diagram that we have. And Jason, I don't know if you've seen that, but we have our.
I saw you got what you talked about, Lope and Form last year.
Yes. Yeah. And
that was great.
Yeah, so that is ultimately, that's kind of the coaching phases. Right, that's more kind of taking a player from that, motor pattern development all the way through to kind of transfer to the golf course, the retention and then transfer phase, and then but the phases that you just talked about kind of almost come before that. That's kind of you're almost talking about the teaching phases. Our model is very much built on kind of the coaching phases that you would take a student through, whereas these 4 kind of are a nice addition to the model we already have.
It reminds me as well of the ones that I've read and heard people reference, where you're unconsciously incompetent, I think, is where it starts. Yes. And you go all the way through. Yeah, you go all the way through to subconsciously competent, and then the final one actually is mastery, which debatably is never achieved. So I like this. I can relate it to other reading that I've done, and I can already picture your lessons creating an effective learning environment, because I guess you're not stuck to a system. You're following a framework, right? There's fluidity inside that framework. Can I ask, Jason? I'm obviously very interested in the coaching, but I'm actually very interested in you as well and your evolution. Having coached for so long, and now you're obviously doing fantastically well with your podcast and the business that you're running. Did you always coach like this, or when did you decide, like, there's got to be something different, I need to make a change? And not only what was the catalyst for that, but also who helped you with that? Who were your mentors? What books have you read? I think that's great for players to know, players and coaches to know.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a whole separate podcast, I think there. Yeah, so going back, like I said, once I left the club pro ranks and decided I wanted to teach full time, and I got with my first really big teaching mentor, which was Dana Rader, as I worked at her golf school. She really stressed the importance of structure in a lesson, right? Learning how to properly interview, and then moving into the diagnosis, and then the same phases we're talking about here, and then the follow up, and then the importance of the long-term plans. So once I started having some success, and then got to Carmel where I could really develop my own program, I quickly figured out, I think probably the second year, that I was not a big fan of the Band-Aid lesson, the one-off lessons. So now I want to do long-term coaching, right? I want to be able to build the students' skills and make them stick, right? So that's when I started doing long-term coaching plans, which included sort of a blend of private lessons and supervised practice in a lot of golf course, right? As much as we can get. We're a very busy private club, so sometimes it's difficult to get on the course. So you've got to be creative with your technology, with your golf, with your range sessions. So in the supervised practices, it was all skill development. It was all basically random practice stuff, right? So it just evolved into that. And when you can start to get people and change the culture of, hey, if I really want to get better, I need to take more than 2 lessons a year. I need to see you every week or every couple of weeks. You can really take your time and make sure you're not getting ahead of the students' learning. And then you don't get as many of those comments like, wow, I'm hitting it great in front of you, but I really can't get it to the golf course, because you don't own it, right? You haven't built up that myelin of the new neurological pattern to make it stick and to make it work under pressure, right? So especially when we're working with high-level players, I always say it's great to make a change and to see ball flight change, but until you can do it under the gun, then it really hasn't happened for you.
And do you see that as one of the biggest problems in the industry that coaches face, the how to help players retain and transfer their skills to the golf course?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely one of the challenges that we have. And again, it has so much to do. It's a team effort, right? It has so much to do with the student buy-in and getting them to trust the fact that there's no magic bullet, right? You can have the best lesson in the world for an hour, but if I don't see you for another couple of months, it's hard to tell what they're going to do, right? I mean, they're out there listening to their friends. They've got other people, all the information on the internet. So you can't rein them into keeping them streamlined with the information that they need. And I know you guys have talked about on your podcast, let's face it, there's a lot of bad information that's being spewed out there by other coaches, right? It's just the way it is. And that's why we do our podcast, is we want to give them, we want to provide the best information for coaches. And we also want to provide the best information for players. And that is going to see somebody that's passionate about helping you play better, not just, taking your money for an hour lesson.
Couldn't agree more. So that being said, I'm really interested in your practice. Did you call it supervised practice?
Sure.
So you've told us what your lesson experience looks like and how you have this framework that you follow. And really the key that I've taken from that, and I really like this, is not get ahead of the students' learning. I think that's a powerful phrase. I'm probably going to start using it myself. And then having explained that, can you explain a little bit more to the listeners what supervised practice? I know you said it's a bit more performance orientated, but if I was, again, so I've come to you for a lesson, I've been through this framework, I turn up at supervised practice, what can I expect?
Yeah, I think it looks a lot like a football practice, right? And again, you guys have talked a lot about is we don't we don't coach on the field that we play on, which is difficult, and why golf is difficult a lot of times. So I try to really, it's a lot of it's short game and putting. I'm a big putting coach as well. So it's setting up drills, setting up constraints and games for the students. And then basically I just feel like I got a whistle in my mouth, and I'm walking around making sure they're doing it right. So it gives me another eye to make sure that they're doing the practice correctly, but also it makes them feel like they're getting more out of their practice as well. So it's just a lot of it. It's a lot of, like I said, helping them understand the different forms of practice, right? So we'll start with, if it's a full swing session or a range session, we'll start out with some block practice where we've got some constraints, training aids, whatnot. And then I will quickly transition them into random practice. Let's take all the aids off the ground. Let's take let's start practicing the different targets. Let's switch clubs. Let's play, some games, or play, a hole or two on the range, and start to see how much of that stuff is really coming through. And I know it's not exactly golf course, but it's about as close as we can get when you start putting some stuff on them that'll add pressure. Because I think that's the thing, is the hardest thing for us as coaches, and I'm curious to hear your guys' take on, is how do you add pressure to their practice, or how do you add stress to their practice? So that's where I'm a big TrackMan guy. So I use TrackMan tests and TrackMan combines like just about every probably third lesson when I'm trying to test whether the skills are coming through. So we'll set up a test and say, hey, you've got 120 to 180 yards. Your goal is this number. Let's go. Right. And let's see how you do. I mean, it was interesting story. I just had one of my tour players in the other day, and he's coming off of an injury, and we're kind of working. His swing's starting to get really good, and he's just striping it. We've worked for a couple hours, and he's like, man, feel really good, pro. I go, well, let's see how you do. So then we set up a little game or a test on TrackMan, and it didn't go so well. Right. But that's okay. What it did was it let us know where we're at. So it gave us a baseline, and also it's going to motivate him to practice and to work on it. That's great for the kids as well. It's like when they start seeing that they come in and say, I'm trying to beat 80 on the TrackMan combine. I haven't got it yet. Guess what? That's going to motivate them to go practice harder when they're not with you.
I love what you said as well when he turns to you and says, I'm feeling good, pro. A lot of pros there, they let the guy walk out the door because he feels good, they feel good.
On the back. Yeah.
And it's just it's a false competence, right? Because we can all go sailing on a smooth sea, but as soon as those waves come, that's when that's when you need the experienced sailor to step in and take over. And if you'd have let him walk out the door feeling good, when he pegs it up in a tour event, that's not reality. So actually, you've given him kind of controlled failure, a realistic view of where he is. That makes his next practice more effective. Arick,
I think it's important. Yeah, it's not about us. It's about the player, and I think that's the big thing I try to get through to coaches out there is. And that's one of the things that I've learned over the years is I'm not afraid to let them hit bad shots. Right. I'm trying to put as much pressure on them as I can to see where it's going to break down, because again, they're going to thank you later because now they know what to work on, and they're going to be more motivated if they're serious to come back and prove you wrong. Yeah. And I think that's the big thing that I've learned is let them hit a few bad shots, just learn to be quiet, let them hit it, and let them start to problem solve a little bit as well. And that's how they start owning it. That's how they start getting to, that complex phase of, okay, I can now take it to the golf course, is they've got to own it. It's not about whether I know you can do it or I can see you do it on the lesson tee. It's about, all right, can we go to the first tee now and aim down the left side and stripe it? Or are we still a little bit nervous about, used to be hitting hooks, so that's the big thing you got to get across.
So Arick's the master. Well, not maybe that's a bit extreme.
That's a bold term.
Arick's pretty good, or very good at creating these constraints games, on-course constraints games. We've both been mentored and are friends with Stuart Morgan, who also has a relationship with Dave Allred. So we've had a good advantage and a good insight into this. So, Arick, why don't you explain a game that you would create on the golf course that adds stress?
Yeah. Well, I'll get to that. I got a couple points I wanted to make. The stress part, kind of going back to what you were asking, it's so dependent on the individual, right? On the student. And it can be as simple as the vocabulary that you use. As soon as you tell a student that, hey, you're about to go do a test, that can create enough stress on its own for the kid, right? So it can be as simple as the vocabulary you use with that student. Some people hate the term test, or you say assessment, or you know whatever vocabulary you use can contribute to that kind of stress factor for the student. As far as an on-course game, again, dependent on the individual, but it can be something where it's, let's say they're struggling with I don't know, short game and putting, just not converting enough up and downs or whatever the case might be. So basically, if they have to miss the green with their approach shot, and then if they don't hit their chip inside of whatever proximity you set, so if they're currently kind of at, we'll say they hit it inside of 9 feet on average, whatever, then, okay, you have to hit it inside of 6 feet. If they don't hit it inside 6 feet, then they have to draw it back a putter length. So now, yeah, and so something simple like that, you're not only creating a little more kind of stress onto their short game, but also now if they don't achieve the proximity constraint with the chip or the pitch, then now it's there's a little more pressure on the putt, and it could be something where they have a target score, or it's if you don't make par, you start the hole over again. And you know that part's a little more challenging. We're fortunate at the club we're at that we have it's usually pretty quiet, so we have the ability to like do if you don't complete this hole with a par, whatever, you start the hole over again. We have the ability to do that. There are a lot of places or pros that don't have that.
Well, Jason was saying a lot of the times he can't get on the course. So
yeah,
it's about
we have 1,000 members, so sometimes it gets tough if it's busy.
Well,
so that's definitely tough.
I saw one. I think this might be my new favorite one, and I've not done it yet. I'm copying it off Stuart Morgan. We shared it on our Instagram. I just thought it was
the driver one.
Yeah. So he's working with a Swiss. I think he's like a Challenge Tour player. And they're working on something technically, and this guy's got 5 balls of technique that he has to go and work on. Before he's allowed to go and work on the 5 balls of technique, Stu's set up an imaginary fairway on the range, and he's got to hit like a slider. He's got to start it down the left of this imaginary fairway, and it's got to peel back into the center. If he fails to execute the shot, he's got to stand there for 5 minutes. That's it. Oh, wow. He's not allowed the 5 balls of technique. He's got to stand there for 5 minutes. And then he gets another drive. And then if he executes it, he gets the 5 balls of technique. If he fails, he's got to stand there for 5 minutes. And I saw it and I was like, man, that 5 minutes would feel... I'm getting nervous thinking about it. I'm not even there. You know, it adds pressure. So I copied it. I'm working with a player who's not quite at that level. So I made the fairway bigger, and he's got to stand there for 3 minutes. So I adapted it to the optimal level, I think, for this student. I don't know if the student that I'm talking about could actually stand still for 5 minutes.
Yeah. But there are so many different ways you can do that. I know I've seen Iain do this, and another coach that we work closely with, Zach Parker. A couple of the students who don't deal well with being like interrupted, so even if we're on the range, you know, they'll have their task that they're doing, and they'll be getting ready. They'll go through their whole routine. They'll set up to the golf ball, and then Iain will say, "Oh, wait, sorry. Can you actually hit to that target for me?" And the kid turns around, and the look that they give, and they're like, "Are you serious?"
That's nothing golf related. That might just be that kid annoyed me that day.
Yeah, but even doing something like that, something simple like that interrupts kind of the flow state that they're trying to get into. And now they're trying to execute a different shot to a different target after they've gone through their whole process, and they're a little frustrated. They might be a little so that might not necessarily be stress. Well, that might not be pressure, but that you're adding some stress to the mix. So Yeah, so there's so many different ways you can kind of do that with students. That's
another
cool way
one
that I've seen it.
Another one, Jason, that Arick uses mainly in the junior program, and it's kind of hard from a business perspective, right? Because if you do a very, very good job setting up these effective practice situations or challenges, the game does the teaching almost for you in some respects. Players become problem solvers. Like you've said, their motivation is different. So I've seen Arick with the junior program. There's 10 levels. Level 1 might be hole a 6-foot putt. Level 2 might be chip it inside 8 feet. Level 3 might be hit it out the bunker and then 2 putt. Because, this is our beginners junior program. If you fail at any of those levels, you have to start back at level 1. Once you get to level 5, you're safe. So Arick's structuring it a bit like a PlayStation game, or I'm guessing how kids feel when they play Fortnite. So you've got this kid that keeps getting in the bunker, he keeps failing, he keeps having to go back to level 1. He's desperate to get to level 5 because he's safe at level 5, so there's an outcome stress. And then what Arick will do, will stand in, give him a little bit of help inside the bunker. If the kid isn't successfully completing the task himself, he'll get out the bunker, he'll get onto the next level, and he'll get to level 5. And he knows he's safe, and you see him run around like Ronaldo when he's just scored a goal in the European Cup final or something like that. And then parents are stood there, and they're watching the chaos that's going on, and me and Arick are really basically, for 80% of the time, just stood there watching the chaos. But the kids are learning. They're learning to compete. They're learning to self-correct. The environment's helping them learn to adapt. And then the best thing, it comes to 45 minutes or an hour and the program's done. And guess what? If a kid's on level 8 or level 9, he's not going home. He's asking his mum and dad, can I stay? I've got to get to the boss level. Because Arick hasn't revealed what the boss level is.
You keep it a secret.
But ultimately, yeah, and look, these kids are young, so they're kind of fearless. They're not really... The parts of the brain that would create worry and stress aren't really as formed as they would be with your adult golfer or tour player. But ultimately, you're teaching them to deal with stress and pressure, and you're creating the golf range to be very much, as much in context as the actual game of golf.
And just to add to that real quick, the nice thing about structuring it in that way is what I've found with these juniors is they're not always as open to the teaching or instruction side of things when they're first learning the game. So when you put them into that situation, like Iain said, if the kid's struggling to hit a shot out of the bunker, it actually creates an opportunity where they'll then seek out help. They'll seek out guidance. They'll come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling on level 3. Can you help me? And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, like there's the opportunity. Now I can actually provide some insight to help this kid. Like, and it's hard as a coach because the whole time you're watching him, you're like, oh my God, I just want to help him with like, this kid he's not doing anything right in the bunker. Like it'd be so easy for me to tell him what to do. But if you are patient and allow them to fail, they'll come to you when they're ready. Yeah. And as soon as that opportunity kind of arises, like, there you go, you have it. Now they're in. So that's a cool thing. I have one more to add if I can. And this was something that I wish I could do before every lesson, but it's hard when somebody's paying you for an hour of your time, where they have to complete something, whether it's, so like with some of the high school players that I work with, there are 2 sisters in particular that I'm thinking of. They both struggle with making putts from kind of that 6 to 9 foot range. So they'd have to make a 10-foot putt before they can go to the range, before we can start our lesson. And it might take 30 minutes, it might take 20 minutes, whatever, but they have to complete this task before we can start. They have to earn their time.
Yeah, buy into practice.
Yeah, and Stuart Morgan was great about this when we were working with him at the International Junior Golf Academy. He'd do for some of the days, you'd have to chip in before you could go to the range, because the kids love the range. They want to be on TrackMan. They want to see their numbers. Okay, cool. You have to earn that. So you have to achieve this before you can gain access to that. And that was a great way to do it as well.
And we love this stuff, right? Jason, I've spoken to you. You're passionate about this skill transfer, creating chaos, creating games and challenges. But we have to be careful, because when we talk about it like this, coaches listening might be like, okay, well, this is the way forward. This is what I'm going to do. But it comes at a cost, right? Because some players, and I've seen it, I've watched it happen with good college players that Arick's coached, good high school players that have college scholarships, they resist. There are tour pros out there that have got to the PGA Tour level, not necessarily training in this way, so why would I change? So, Jason, do you ever believe that your philosophy and I guess forward-thinking approach to golf training, does it ever cost you business? Does it ever cause you player issues? And if it does, how do you deal with all that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say, yeah. I mean, I think it's difficult for even the students have that old school mentality of I'm going to go take a 30-minute or an hour lesson. I'm going to get my pro to get me striping it, and that's all I need, and I can just go play, and everything's going to be great. They don't understand that you've got to build those skills over that process that we discussed earlier, and a lot of times if they feel like, just like you were saying earlier, if you don't give them a lot of information in an hour, they feel like they've been cheated, even though it might be the best thing for them, right? And they may not come back, right? So you may get that reputation. But again, I'm willing to do that because I think it's the right thing to do, and it's the proper way to train golfers. And I think the results speak for themselves. And if you get enough serious golfers that they start beating their buddies on Saturday morning, they're going to start buying in.
Yeah.
After you get enough success stories, which that's what's happened to us. It took me a couple of years to probably change the culture at Carmel to get them buying into that, but eventually it'll happen if you stay consistent with your message and can stay consistent with your staff and then what you're doing. I just think it's the right thing to do. But yeah, you're definitely going to have some people that don't buy into that sort of mentality.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to one of the notes I wrote down when you were talking about those 4 learning phases in Transcendental. I wrote down the word compelling. And in any situation, whether you have a student who, like Iain said, there's a little friction there, they've done things one way, you have to be able as a coach, if you have to be able to provide a compelling reason that's going to result in them buying into that. And that's 100%. And that's where a lot of the stuff we do is always, I tell all the players that we're potential players that we're going to work with, like, look, this is more about you deciding that you want to work with us as much as it is us deciding we want to work with you. And this is what we're going to do, and this is what we expect. What do you want from us? And we try to make sure that it's a good fit, and there has to be a compelling reason. And if it's not a good fit, if they don't necessarily want to be doing the things that we're asking to, then we have no issues with kind of, cutting the relationship. And it's not anything against the player. It's just making sure that, you're going to be getting players that are going to be motivated and want to do things the way that our beliefs and foundations are kind of built on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and that's where, let's face it, we've got to be salesmen, especially on the front end, is you got to lay it out and you've got to be able to communicate to that student. This is what the process is going to look like to get to whatever goal you've set. And that's where most students just have expectations that are unrealistic, right? So they want to get to, from a 10 to a 5, but they don't understand what it takes and the time it's going to take to get there. So we're going to have a losing battle if we tell them that you can get there with, an hour of practice and then 2 lessons every 6 months, right? So I try to just frame it like, all right, this is what it's going to take. This is what the roadmap looks like. This is the plan. It's up to them if they want to buy in. If not, we're wasting our time and we're both going to fail.
Awesome. So, Jason, you've coached, as you said, I think you said 26 years. You've established a very successful business. It sounds like a great club with, even more importantly, an incredible coaching framework. And you're now mentoring assistants to come up through your framework. Your podcast is obviously killing it. Nick Duffy, a good friend of mine and someone that you met at the P.G.A show, he's a serial podcaster. It was like maybe 3 years ago he got me into Joe Rogan, and now I feel like I feel like me and Joe Rogan know each other extremely well, except he has no idea who I am. So I'm always taking recommendations off Nick, and when Nick recommended your podcast, I knew you were doing something right, and that's what compelled me to ask you to come on. But what's next, man? I know a guy like you doesn't stop. So what's the next mission? What's the next idea, or is it secret?
Wow. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure this podcast thing out, man. I'm having such a great time. I mean, you know that you're doing something right when people, and I'm not, I'm making no money, right? It's like it's interesting. Like when we say I'd teach for free if I didn't have to pay the mortgage, right?
Yeah.
But it gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm excited for the next interview. I'm excited for the next relationship, and when people come up to you at the P.G.A show or the Teaching and Coaching Summit this year and say, hey, I'm enjoying your podcast, keep them coming. And I get so many DMs and text messages saying they enjoyed or they learned something from my podcast, that makes it all worth it. So I'm not sure. I mean, again, it's so new. And again, I've just enjoyed building a new skill, which people ask me all the time. It's like, what have you learned from doing the podcast? And I say, well, interview skills are a huge part of what I do every day. So I've learned to ask better questions. I've learned to ask the right questions. Like it's easy to talk when you're teaching, but talk less and get the more out of your student. And that's really all we're doing as podcasters is being a better interviewer and then being a better listener to what they're sharing with you so you can help that student. So I don't know if I answered your question at all there, but I mean, it's really been an interesting journey, and I'm excited to see what this season 2 brings from the Golf Guru show.
Yeah, us too. I mean, again, the thing about Joe Rogan, you can tell he loves his life. You can tell he's passionate about what he does. He's creating positive change. He's very relaxed when he interviews, and I think it's the same shines through in yourself. So I'm excited that we got to speak. I'm going to send you the transcript. Our new book is coming out. We hope to have it out by April the 9th, because that's when we're doing our first certification. But I'm going to send you the transcript to read before, if that's okay, because I would love your feedback on it. And funnily enough, the title is Golf Practice: How to Take Your Range Game to the Course. So there's a little plug for ourselves.
Yeah.
But I would love your feedback, and we're gonna, like I say, we'll create a few blogs. But Jason, your energy and passion and knowledge is refreshing, and I'm sure that's why you're doing so well. So I would love to connect again in the future, and thanks so much for coming on. It was awesome.
That was my pleasure. Anytime.
Cool. Jason, if anybody wants to reach out, contact you, obviously find your stuff, what's the best way to do that? I guess social media handles, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I'm for Twitter or Instagram. It's at Golf Guru TV, and you can hit me up on Facebook if you're a golfer or a golf teacher. I'll friend you up. Jason Sutton Golf, but everything's Golf Guru TV. The podcast is the Golf Guru Show. You can find that on any platform: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, any of your podcast platforms. You can email me. And once you subscribe to the podcast, email the show at golfgurushow@gmail.com, or you can email me personally at golfgurutv@gmail.com. But I'm not hard to find, as you guys know, and love talking golf and love to help people. And that's the thing that makes all this stuff worth it. What we're doing is sharing this information. Is when you get that email from that young coach that says, hey, you've really helped me. Can I come shadow you? Do you mind spending some time with me? That is my passion, is really passing on what I've learned over my 26 years with the young coaches out there and leaving the teaching game better than I found it.
Yep.
I get that email from Arick every day. Okay, Arick, close it. On that note, close it out.
Cool. Well, Jason, thanks for your time. I really enjoyed that conversation. I think people are going to get a lot out of this podcast. So for anybody listening, to keep up to date with the show, make sure you subscribe to our mailing list. Go to our website, gltgolf.com. You can subscribe there. Follow us on SoundCloud. We're also on the iTunes podcast, Apple podcast. We're also social media channels on Twitter at GLT Golf, Facebook, Game Like Training Golf, Instagram. Did that one change? Is it still GL Training Golf?
No, Game L Training.
Game L Training. I knew that one changed. Everything we publish gets put out some way, shape, or form. I also almost forgot, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Game Like Training. You can watch all the podcasts there. Must tell you, Ian, that was a lot of fun. Jason, thanks again for your time, man. That was really good.
Jason, I'm gonna hang up now. I've got to drive to a lesson. I'm gonna give you a call quickly, and we'll catch up. I've got a couple of things I want to run past you. Okay. All right. Cheers,
Cool.
dude.
Thanks,
so
Jason.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye.